So, our last but not the least speaker is my dear comrade Luke Daniels. He is the president of the Caribbean Labour Solidarity, chair of Islington Pensioners Forum. Luke Daniels is an social activist, counselor and consultant on domestic violence, who was born in Guyana, is a UK based and has worked internationally. His book, Pulling the Punches, Defeating Domestic Violence in 2014, was the first self-help guide for perpetrators, and his 2018 book, Defeating Domestic Violence in the Americas, Men's Work, I've read these two books myself, charts the region's history of violence from before Columbus and how it impacts on our societies today. He's a strong campaigner for reparations for African enslavement. Read his books. Look, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Francisco. You're a good friend. I know we're talking about the end of fascism. It didn't feel like that 2 weeks ago, as I was nearly kettled in Whitehall with the anti-fascist group who had opposed the fascists who would come out on that day. There were some 140,000, some said 150,000. Some put it a bit less, but it felt like a huge number, and it was scary for a lot of people. I managed to just escape being kettled because I heard a conversation from some of the police who were saying that they had lost their flanks, which meant that the fascists had broken through by Trafalgar Square, and I could see that we could be trapped in Whitehall. And I retreated with my comrades probably 15 minutes before they were captured in that corner. It's been a hot summer, and it's been a lot of activities fighting the fascists on the streets. So when I see...
I didn't understand that.
Shut up. That was my phone. Put it somewhere else. That was my phone. Sorry about that. And yes, it didn't feel like, the summer was really hot because I was involved with a lot of activities fighting fascism on the streets. They'd come to my backyard in Islington, 5 minutes walk from where I lived at Thistle Hotel, to try and antagonize the migrants and refugees who were staying at Thistle Hotel. We had to be called out about 3 times to defend those migrants against the fascists. We outnumbered them every time, I must say. We were determined that they would not come into Islington and have a good day. But then I got a call this morning that the hotel had been attacked on Wednesday night, someone wielding a knife and attempting to burn the hotel. They was arrested by the police. So the struggle continues, and we know the demonstration that we saw. Many of you would have seen the thousands of flags all over the country. Rosebery Avenue, where I live, was littered in flags, and we know that this is a much financed operation. Fascism is very much alive and well and being financed by billionaires, as we heard about Bolsonaro. We've heard about Musk. We've seen him with its Nazi salute on Trump's parade. And so we're in great danger still in this country, especially that the 3 main political parties seem to be vying to outdo each other as who can be the most horrible to migrants and to refugees. And this is having an effect not only on people who are fleeing some horrible conditions for safety and coming to this country, but it's beginning to affect the people who were born in this country and people who've been living here for generations as racist attacks continue. People have been killed, people have been hurt, people have been insulted. We just heard of a girl, 9-year-old, being shot with an air gun pellet. People being stabbed. People being insulted on the trains. And so we have to be vigilant that fascism is not taking hold in this country and we have to be out there fighting every second of the day. I think much of it is being fueled by Trump, and we saw from his victory what a nasty man he can be. He's determined to go after anybody who's ever insulted or not liked him or not being nice to him, as it were. And he's gone after black people and brown people from the global south, deporting thousands and tens of thousands. People are living in fear on the streets in America, and he seems determined that black people, wherever they are, will be frightened. He's told Starmer he should bring the troops out with the boats. They're fueling the fascists in Europe, and we in the Caribbean have been affected because many people have been deported, families destroyed. People are living in real terror in America. So when we talk about China and America, that shouldn't even be on the same page in terms of peace. We in the Caribbean have always supported a non-aligned movement. We've been strong supporters of the non-aligned movement. And now that Trump is actually trying to force Caribbean governments to make a choice, either you support China or you support America. And we heard Francisco about the case of Panama, and we know other governments are under pressure in the same way. Well, for me, it's a no-brainer as to which one to support. I started to draw up a list of the things about America that is so nasty. And I had to stop. It would have gone on for a long time, and I would be here sitting for a very long time talking to you. But I should mention some of them because, America was grounded and rooted in the genocide of the indigenous people, followed by hundreds of years of enslavement for Africans. They've done some nasty things in the time, and they continue. We know of what happened to George Floyd by the police killings and the Black Lives Movement that began as a result. And those attacks in some ways continue because the black people are being targeted in the US and outside of the US. And it is costing lives. The US threatens the sovereignty of every nation in the region. And we see recently the incursions and the attacks on Venezuela. We know of the embargo on Cuba. I won't go over the ground that many people have covered already, Nicaragua. I could go on forever. They've invaded so many countries and so many times over. They're hated in most places. Right now, the crisis in Haiti, they can't even show their face because of the many times they've occupied Haiti, spending up to 19 years one time, looting the gold from the bank, from the central bank, as they left on one occasion. And now they're looking for proxies to do the dirty work in Haiti, bringing in people from Kenya and looking to get Caribbean governments to cooperate with their agenda for Haiti. And I should remind people one of the only successful slave revolution in the world, and they continue to be punished for daring to free themselves. France had imposed reparations on them that they had to pay. France, to the tune, I think it was 20 billion at the time, which they only recently finished paying off. That's one of the demands that we in the Caribbean are making for reparations, not only for Haiti, but for the enslavement of Africans throughout the Caribbean, and Britain being one of the greatest beneficiaries of that period. We are making that demand that they apologize and they pay for reparations. But continuing with the, who would you support? This for trying to force Caribbean governments to support America or China. It's a no-brainer, as I said. They've come in with Latin American countries, as I said, several times over being invaded. They're still occupying areas of Cuba, Guantanamo Bay, which many of you would have heard about over, what has gone on in Afghanistan. They've invaded Little Grenada, and some of, on the pretext that Grenada somehow was a threat to American security. Now, if I remember correctly, Grenada has about 236,000 people or something like that. 260,000 people, somewhere in that region, Grenada. And somehow they are deemed a threat to American security. The threat was the example that they set. And in a very short time, that revolution had produced so much for the Grenadian people that it was an embarrassment to the United States. So they were determined to crush that example. And it's why, in some ways, China is enemy number one. The example that they are setting to the world in lifting people out of poverty, aiding countries with sustainable development, and especially in the Caribbean, building roads where roads have never been before, and other infrastructure to make people's lives a bit better in the region. In Guyana, the Americans also intervened in Guyana when we had the first, and I'm told the only Marxist government that was elected under Cheddi Jagan in Guyana. The Americans and British conspired to end that government. And then we had a dictatorship imposed on us for many years, and racial war was stirred up in Guyana, a situation that we're still dealing with today. So the legacy lives on about the intervention in Guyana and in Grenada. When we look at the number of military bases that America has throughout the world, and including the largest one in Colombia, we know who is for war and who is for peace. When they twist the arms of Europeans to spend on arms, and mainly American arms, they got to buy it from them, a lot of it. So make America great again. Let the Europeans and let the British pay for those arms. So when you weigh that up with also the zone of peace that we had declared in the Caribbean, which is America just ignores with these warships, and we understand nuclear submarines as well on the way in the region, despite complaints from the Caribbean and CARICOM countries. China, on the other hand, never enslaved our ancestors. They bring development and investment to the region with the road and belt, offers hope of a brighter future for the world with visions of peace and coexistence. And we heard of the solar panels that they assist many countries with. They're manufacturing at great numbers. And we heard from the Venezuelan charge here about the mutual trust with which they were treated by the Chinese in their dealings. The USA has spent so much on arms and has invaded and done so much damage in the region. I'm sure that most of you will agree with me that if you were to weigh up whether China or America, who will win the vote? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luke. Not too long ago, people who were organizing demonstrations in the streets in many cities in Europe were being banned, thrown into jail and so on for waving Palestinian flags. And now all these presidents and prime ministers actually have recognized Palestine themselves in one single go. The hypocrisy has no limit. Xenophobia pays off, particularly in the United States, because, and I'm glad that Luke raised that, particularly because they cannot fight on the real program that they have, which is total massive austerity at home and war abroad. That is really what is going on. And in order to ensure there is no dissent domestically, they label anybody who opposes them as terrorists, which empowers them legally to actually do whatever they want with them. That is the cocktail that the United States prepared to use its military power to maintain its hegemony. I want to abuse my position as chair for 1 second, if I may, regarding Venezuela, because I'm the secretary of the Venezuela campaign. The reason for the military deployment is because the United States declared Venezuela to be a narco-state. According to the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime, which produces a report every year, which is the most reliable in the world, which has got something like 300 pages, people like me read every time. According to them, 92% of the cocaine that is produced in Colombia goes to the United States via the Pacific. Venezuela has no coast in the Pacific, and only 5% or 8% tries to get through Venezuela. So there is no justification on earth for what they're doing, and it's part and parcel of the intention of the United States to maintain hegemony by destroying the country, that is the government that is opposing them to lay their filthy hands on the largest deposit of oil in the world. I've finished with that. Thank you very much.